2 of Spooky South Coast. Tim Weisberg here, along with the silent assassin Matt Costa, science advisor Matt Moniz, and Stephanie Burke, both off tonight. They'll probably both be back next week. I think Stephanie will.
Yeah, I think so.
Moniz is very busy this time of year, so we'll see.
Being Krampus.
Is that what it is?
I think so.
Is that
yeah.
He didn't tell me exactly what he was doing, so
keeps it under wraps.
I don't blame him. Well, you don't want to get that. You don't want that out of the bag. But we are here talking about the paranormal, and we're talking about the ghosts of Plymouth, Massachusetts tonight with our guest Darcy Lee. She's here with us in the studio. Before we get back into the discussion, we have a few thank yous to give over the break there, over the news. We want to say thank you to Anna, who came in with some Christmas candies for us that I should have not mentioned on the show because now Stephanie and Moniz are going to know when we don't share.
Right.
I'm just kidding. We're going to share with them.
We'll just be like, Moniz and Stephanie, Anna brought us a half a box of chocolates.
She brought you each a chocolate.
Right. She's like, all these have bites out of them.
Well,
wonder how that happened.
Because we had to figure out which ones were the ones with the the raspberry filling.
Right.
Because those are what you like, right?
Those are the garbage ones.
No, they're all good. Those Russell Stover, those are all good. We want to say thank you to her. And we want to say thank you. He probably doesn't want us to mention his name, but we got to say thank you to somebody in the chat room who just helped us out huge with a holiday donation.
Right, of course. Professor Eric.
I was going to not mention his name.
I thought you were just going to...
No,
he did say it in the chat.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Professor Eric, for that very generous donation that we will use to immediately get the iOS store taken care of, and we'll have the app back up for people. Do you almost feel now like we need a better app?
Maybe. The pressure's on now.
You made a great app, Matt. You made a great app. Not bad for being your first time.
Right, exactly.
Although I really wish we had we should have made the iPoop app. We talked about it for years, and now it's huge.
Yep.
See, and if we had just done it, there's so many apps that we came up with ideas for that we just never followed through on that people are going to steal from us. Remember when I wanted to have that business where I just drove fast food to the people at the UMass dorms?
Oh yeah, is that a thing now?
Oh yeah, it's a huge business now. Yeah, and Uber does it. Uber
really?
has Uber Eats, where they'll bring you food delivery.
Man.
See? And I was going to do this with like a 1980s Zach Morris cell phone and some flyers at UMass Dartmouth.
I don't know if I would get fast food delivered, though. Like, I don't know, like McDonald's fries, not to call them out by name, but they have like a 3-second shelf life. Then they turn ice cold. So I got to eat them all at once. You just shove as many fries as
we have to let Darcy in on this. There's always a portion of the show.
We just talk about food.
Yeah, where we just talk about food. It's never planned. It's not supposed to happen that way, but it's a rabbit hole we fall down every week.
We get the hungry whores.
But McDonald's now also offers, have you seen this now? What they do? They offer a basket of fries.
A basket of fries.
So instead of just buying like a small, medium, large, supersize, all that stuff, you can buy a basket of fries like you would if you went to like Cool Cone or something. So you buy this like basket of McDonald's fries, and I'm like, but they get cold when it's a small.
Yeah.
But I got one time.
I noticed they have the nuggets that are like, you get 2 10-piece nuggets for $5 or the 20-piece for $5.
Right. McDonald's is nothing if not precise with their math.
But it's, I don't know.
The my favorite is
doesn't add up.
My favorite though is when you go over there like with the app, because I use the app because I like to save money. Sometimes I go over there and I use the app and I don't even want 2 sandwiches, but I buy 2 sandwiches because I have the app. Just eat one, take one home. Mm-hmm. Somebody will eat it, or bring it here. Somebody will eat it. But every time I use the app, it's like I'm the first person that's ever gone into that McDonald's and ever used an app. Like they're like, hold on, what do I do? Wait, let me call the manager over. I'm not sure. It's not working. Like, no, it is working. You just don't want to give me that free sandwich.
That's right. Between that and the ice cream machine that's always broken.
Oh man, don't get me started on that. Listen, McDonald's, I shouldn't eat your food. I really shouldn't. And I try not to. I've had very little McDonald's in recent months.
Stop making it so delicious.
But don't mess around with me when I want $1 soft serve vanilla ice cream cone.
Well, they brought back the dollar menu. Did they?
I don't know. Did they?
Hmm.
When I want that,
It used to be like the $1.29, whatever.
When I
value
want
there.
that $1 or $1.20, whatever it is,
Right.
when I want that vanilla soft serve cone, just give it to me. I don't mess around when it comes to my ice cream.
It's true.
But anyway, we digress, as we always do. Let's get back into the discussion for tonight's show. And if you want to call in at any point with any questions, 508-996-0500, 877-996-1420. But we did have some questions that popped up in the chat room during the first hour and during the break. So we want to try and see if we can address those first. Matt, I'm just going to scroll through. So a question from James. They want to know if, we talked about King Philip's head being on a pike in Plymouth. Do they feel like Metacom, King Philip, do they feel like he haunts Plymouth?
Some people do say that he does, because in the area where it's been determined where his head was placed on a spike, it's located in Town Square. So down the hill from Burial Hill, there's an area that's right in front of the First Parish Meeting House, which is on the cover of my book, that they believe that that's where his head was. People have had very strong feelings of just desperation, fear, and something very, very negative is there. Could he be haunting Plymouth? He could. It's a tragedy and an irony that, as I mentioned earlier in the show, that his father was Massasoit, who brokered the peace with the Pilgrims, and that he would then be brought back after having been drawn and quartered, and also have his hand brought back as well to Plymouth as a symbol of...
And not to mention either, he felt that the Pilgrims killed his brother Wamsutta, even though he supposedly died of the flu.
Right.
Like, he always blamed them for his death. That's part of what kicked off the war.
Right.
So, he had a good reason to be angry and to not want to leave. And when we say that his head was on a pike in the middle of downtown Plymouth, we're not talking about, like, they put it out there, and then when it started to stink, they said, let's go put it away. It was there for a long time.
It was there for 20 years.
That's a long time to have
That's
a head
a
on
very
a pike.
long time. And it sends a message.
Jeffrey Dahmer didn't keep heads around that much. That
No,
long.
he did not. But it definitely sends the message of, don't mess with us. It's our place now. And look what we did to him, the leader. Just imagine what we'll do to you.
And, talking about some of these older stories, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of stuff that dates back to that era. There's a lot of stuff that comes through a lot of the colonial era. But Plymouth is a town that is still very much a living, breathing entity. And it's still holding in its ghost. It's still collecting its ghost stories. One of my, I don't know if you covered it in the book, but one of my favorite haunted places in Plymouth, and a lot of people don't know about it, but then when I bring it up, they say, oh yeah, I can see that. One of my favorite haunted locations in Plymouth is Cordage Park.
Aha. It is in the book.
Nice.
Yes. So Cordage Park was a place that was once called the Cordage Rope Company. And it was the largest manufacturer of rope in the world. It was a sprawling complex, multiple acres of buildings, train tracks, a dock, a couple of different docks. So this was, they supplied rope to the world for rigging, for anything that you could ever imagine that rope is used for. So thousands and thousands of people and generations of families worked at the Cordage Company. And it was around for about 150 years. So one can imagine from its earliest beginnings, it's a very industrial place. It's a very industrial business. And workers would be working in conditions that might not have always been the safest conditions. There are stories about that I heard a lot of stories, let me put it this way, about hauntings in the train tunnel, hauntings in the main Cordage building, of an elevator going up and down, or the the voices of workers late at night. People would hear music late at night. There's also the story of what people believe to be the screams and cries of a small child coming from one of the smokestacks. So I met with the person who had been the general manager of the property for decades and asked him his opinion about whether any of Cordage was haunted. And he told me the story about, that in any place, working in such conditions, it could be dangerous. He wasn't aware of any child that would ever have been sent into a smokestack to clean it. Most likely, that's not true. He said that the noise that was being heard late at night by different people, security guards, was probably noise coming from the Black Raspberry pub. Elevators operating on their own, someone could have pressed the button, walked away. So those stories he wasn't so keen on, that it was haunted. But he did tell me a story that makes a lot of sense about the train tunnel. So the trains would operate by an engineer and workers who would check to see where in a tunnel where they would have to make sure that another train wasn't coming in the tunnel when they were entering the tunnel. So the trains would run from the docks to the factory and from the factory to the docks. So it was critical that before entering the tunnel, the engineers send a worker to check to make sure that that tunnel was clear so that they could pass. There is a story about one of the engineers, and reportedly he was under the influence of alcohol at the time. He did hit one of the workers, and a worker was killed in the train tunnel at the Cordage. So there could be a haunting of the tunnel of someone who was killed in such a tragic and dangerous way. There's also a story about one of the office buildings at Cordage Park. It's now an office building. It was what they called the Recreation Center. Attached to that was the Cordage Park Commissary that was called Harris Hall. Over the years, after Cordage Park closed down as a rope manufacturer, the buildings have served different purposes. They've either been torn down, they either remain and they're storage facilities, or they become a different business, as with the office building that's a separate entity now from the Cordage Company. In 1992, there were 2 abductions of young women from the facility of the Recreation Center, from the stairs of the facility of the Recreation Center. One of them, women, tragically was murdered inside of the old Harris Hall building. Ooh. Yes, and that was connected to the Recreation Center. Very tragic tale. It was the man who did this is now in jail for the rest of his life. But there were reports in the office building at the office that was connected to the entrance to that Harris Hall area. There were reports of electronics just going haywire. Printers printing on their own, and not just one printer. There would be a printer that would malfunction and print on its own blank sheets of paper. The staff in the office called in their tech person to check on this. There was nothing wrong with the printer. They ended up having to get a new printer, and the same thing would happen. So they've also, the staff members in this particular office have also reported hearing shrieks and cries late at night. If they've had to stay late, they hear that off in the direction of where Harris Hall once stood. Harris Hall no longer stands. It was torn down after this incident. So there could very well be ghosts that haunt the vast complex of the Cordage Company?
Well, I'm here to tell you firsthand that there are. When I was younger, in the 80s, when I was living in Plymouth, Cordage Park was kind of a I don't want to say happening place, but there was a lot of activity there, a lot of stores, and we would often go there and do shopping and what have you. And it must have been the early 90s because we were already living in Wareham, but my dad used to have a flea market table that he would go to different flea markets and sell auto parts. And they had a flea market at Cordage Park for a little while, and we were there, and I just remember it always being super dark inside of there. But anyway, I remember that the person who was in charge of the building, and this was in the not the main Cordage Park building where all the where the pub is and all that stuff, but the long building heading toward the now vacant Walmart. But in that middle section, they had the flea market, and the person that was in charge of the building gave me $5 to go walk around and open up all the doors in the main building. So I went in there, and one of the first things that I did is I had to use the restroom. So I went to, and if anybody's ever been in Cordage Park, the restrooms are kind of weird in there. It's like a long hallway that you walk into, and then there's stalls that have like tall doors. So when you're in the stall, you're closed in. And I went into the bathroom and I closed the door, and it was a sit down affair. So as I sat down, I could hear the door to the bathroom close. And I'm like, but I haven't opened any of the doors yet. Who followed me into the bathroom? And I'm just thinking to myself, some weirdo is coming into the bathroom with me, and I can't see when they're coming because of the doors. You can't see underneath to see people's feet or what have you. And then I hear the other doors to the other stalls kind of banging. And I'm like, it's coming toward me, but nothing happened. And so when I open the door and I go out, there's nobody in there. And at this time, I'm not thinking anything paranormal or anything ghosts. But as I'm walking around, I'm just feeling like there's somebody watching me, like there's somebody following me. And I keep turning around and there's nobody behind me. And I just run through and I open up all those doors and I ran back. But it made me think of a story from when I was younger. And when you were talking before about hearing the singing and hearing the voices, I remember being in Cordage Park, and they have the elevator in the middle, but they also have that staircase next to it. And I was going up the staircase or coming down, but I was on the stairs, and all of a sudden I heard music, singing, coming out of nowhere. And it wasn't Muzak coming over the system. It wasn't anything like that. And I remember saying something to my dad about it, and I don't know if he was just joking with me or what, but I just had metal fillings put in. And so he's like, oh, your metal fillings are probably picking up the radio station. But I lived way closer to the WPLM towers than I was when I was at Cordage Park. So I would think that if my fillings were going to rattle from the radio, it would be when I was at home, when I was closer to it. And so I never really put that thought into my head until you mentioned that maybe what I heard was some of that kind of that fan, because I definitely would not be surprised if somebody heard voices in there. I'm sure I heard whispering when I was running around in there, but it's definitely a place where I got super freaked out, so bad that I didn't even go back there for a number of years.
Wow.
So
that really affected you.
It did. I mean, and usually that kind of stuff doesn't freak me out, but it took them opening up a record store, and me wanting to go in there and find some old records for me to actually go there. It was the guy had all the import CDs and all that stuff. And I was like, well, I got to go get these CDs, and I can't get them anywhere else. So I guess I have to go to Cordage Park. But even that Walmart, I would never go there.
Wow.
Now they've moved the Walmart.
Yes, they've torn down the Walmart. It is now really a vital Cordage Park, even though it's haunted, is and remains a very vital part of the community, because it's now home to doctors' offices, restaurants.
There's
they're
new
building
ownership.
They're building a medical center. They have they have a marina there. There's a tea stop there, so people can take the train to and from Boston. So it's a really vital part of the community.
And it's a fantastic location. And when you're there and you're going there, you're like, why can't they do any more with this than they did? And maybe they've kind of finally broken out of that curse of what was there for so long. But it's certainly a great place to go and walk around and hang out and just go and see for yourself. And it is stepping right back into history.
Right.
And for those of you who don't know, the Walmart that was there at the time was, if I remember right, was the only Walmart in the country that looked different than every other Walmart. They got a special, they had to have a special arrangement with Walmart to come in there that it had to look like Cordage Park. It had to be a brick building that looked like it fit in. So they couldn't just build it like the regular Walmarts they do everywhere else. And then they go through all that trouble and say, hey, we're going to go move across town now. But,
interesting factoid.
yeah, but even that area, I mean, even the area where Colony Place is and all that stuff that they have now, you know, I grew up not that far from there, and that was, a lot of that was all woods and, you know, back road stuff. And Route 44 was nothing like it was then. When you went down Route 44, especially at night, it was freaky.
Yes. Yes, it was a rural route, and now it's a major highway. And we still refer to it in Plymouth as the new 44 and the old 44.
Right. Is there a place now that, you know, there's all these historical stories, but is there a place with a haunting that you can think of that's a more recent story, like a more recent maybe tragedy that affected it, something from like the 70s, 80s, 90s era?
Yes, I can tell you that in the late 90s, there was a terrible murder on Lydon Street. Now, Lydon Street was the street where, when the Pilgrims left the fort, they built their houses on Lydon Street. So it's one of the oldest streets in America. Very historic, lovely mansions line the street today, and there's a hill that goes straight down to the water. In one of those houses in the late 1990s lived a man and a woman in a house that had been converted into apartments. Suddenly, the wife disappeared. She was supposed to go to a party and then appear at work. She worked locally, and she didn't arrive, and she didn't show up at work. During that time, her husband disappeared as well. So she was missing for 3 months.
Whoa.
3 months, and they had searched the apartment. They had searched the entire house. As I mentioned, it's a number of apartments in that house. There are a number of apartments in that house. They had searched the attic. They had tried to track her through credit cards. The husband was on the run. They were able to track him and find him. But that's after they eventually found her up in the attic. He had murdered her and hid her in the attic, hid her so well that even the police couldn't find her for those 3 months.
Wow.
They eventually caught him because he was using her credit cards. He was gambling. He was down in New Jersey gambling, and that's where they eventually found him. And they tracked him because someone recognized that his name, because there was a warrant out for his arrest, and they were just about to do a special on America's Most Wanted to try to find him. So he was brought back to Massachusetts. What was interesting about what people would eventually experience, people who lived in that apartment, was that the couple had all sorts of different videotapes back in the era of videotapes, and many of them,
they weren't that far from Video Paradise, where I used to get my
that's
videotapes.
right. That's right. But they had a collection of videos of the television show Little House on the Prairie, and supposedly this was the woman's favorite show on TV. People who later moved into that particular apartment would experience their television going on by itself. They did not press the clicker or turn the TV set on, and when it went on to the show Little House on the Prairie.
Wow. Which, by the way, isn't really on television all that much anymore, so that's extra freaky. Now, Lydon is one of those streets on the hills that come off of Samoset, right? What is with the hills in that area? They seem to have, it's almost like there's a geomagnetic power to them.
There could be. There very well could be. I mean, we know that what is in the earth, rocks, stones, quartz, metals, they all attract energies and shift energies. So Plymouth is a place that's very, very hilly. It's ups and downs and groves and grooves, and so the terrain itself is like that, where there's rock, sand, land, pine barrens.
One of the freakiest places, and it's beautiful. Don't get me wrong, but it also just creeps me out to be there. Is the Forefathers Monument, and I haven't been to the top of the Standish Monument in Duxbury, but I've heard it's kind of the similar feel, and that there seems to be. It's almost like the Forefathers Monument is some kind of a beacon to whatever is out there, because if it's just creepy.
It's interesting that you should say that about the Forefathers Monument, because there is a house that I wrote about in the book. I interviewed an individual who reported that he had seen and experienced a haunting at a house that is on that street, and his friend, it was a childhood friend who lived there, that friend and his family experienced terrifying apparitions. And it was so bad that they moved. They left overnight. They just could not take the hauntings anymore. One of a tall and slender man, a vision that would walk through the room. He was menacing looking. And noises, slamming doors, unexplainable noises, just terrifying visions that they experienced. It's a house very close to the Forefathers Monument.
Doesn't surprise me at all. Like I said, it's beautiful. When you walk around it and you read all the inscriptions and you realize what it's there for, it's phenomenal. But at the same time, my dad used to work early mornings, and sometimes I would go with him and we'd be riding around, and that was like one of those spots where you didn't even want to look at it if the sun wasn't up yet. Like driving by it, it was kind of like, all right, I know it's there. I know that she's standing there. And it's still, if I'm driving, like when you're driving around at night and you want to kind of creep yourself out a little bit, you take a little stroll by, a little ride by, park the car, maybe run up, dare yourself to run up and then run back. But it certainly definitely has a power. Now, I think when people hear about Plymouth and they think about Plymouth, a lot of people look at Plymouth Plantation and they say, here's an area that, is reaching back into history, but it's more of a modern recreation of what it was. It's not like you're dealing with buildings that are authentic to the time period. They're just recreations of that. But Plymouth Plantation has a lot of reputation of having activity around it. And I'm assuming a lot of that could also include more modern era stuff too. Yes.
Well, I did, in the earlier hour of the show, talk about Clark's Garrison. And it has been reported that in that area there are shrieks and cries and just a general dismal feeling. Plymouth Plantation itself is a well-researched reproduction living history museum and attraction, and everyone should go there and experience a Thanksgiving dinner there. So all through the month of November
Listen, the sister station to our station, Fun 107, they were actually over there on Thanksgiving morning, but they didn't bother to bring anything back for the AM side at all. But, but I have heard that the meals there are phenomenal.
Yes, it's a terrific experience. And if you want to, interact with living history characters who are playing actual people that we know of in history, Winslow, White, Bradford, Alice Southworth. It's really a fascinating experience. Other places, if you're interested in, apart from hauntings, but where you can get the real history of Plymouth and Plymouth Colony, everyone should visit Pilgrim Hall Museum and really see the Pilgrim story and the Native American story through the real artifacts of the Pilgrims. So I think those are two things. If people haven't done that, they should check them off their to-do list or their bucket list.
And speaking of Plymouth Plantation and the interpretations there, a good friend of the show, Tim Turner, is one of the native interpreters there, and he also runs the Native Plymouth tours. And we've been trying to get him on for years to talk about the Native American ghost story. So we'll get him on sometime. It's very hard to get anyone from the Wampanoag tribe to come on and talk about that because it's considered taboo for them to share those stories with outsiders.
Yes, that's true. But Tim does a terrific Native Plymouth tour, walking tour that people should take. I have taken that tour before and really learned some nuggets of information that I hadn't heard before. There
was one, I guess the chief of the tribe a couple years ago. That was probably about 10 years ago now. I made arrangements through email, and I think we even talked on the phone for him to come on the show. And originally he was going to come in, and then he changed his mind and said he just wanted to do it over the phone. And he was going to come on and share some Native American ghost stories with us and supernatural stories. And it got to be the night of the show, and 9 o'clock. So we come on the air at 10 o'clock. So it's about 9 o'clock. I'm hitting the highway on my way here. And my phone rings, and it's him. And he says, listen, I just can't do it. I'm getting too much pressure from others, from the other elders. I can't do it. And so it just amazes me how much, and it was like this with, and I'm sure you dealt with it, with a lot of any of the ghost stories in Plymouth. People hold on to them so tightly, and they kind of didn't want to share them with the outside world. I'm sure that, being part of that historical community gave you that leg in that an outsider wouldn't have been able to get.
Yes, I think that helped. I do think it helped because people do hold on to those stories. And, is it a cultural difference with the Native American culture? Yes. We're a little, I think, in Plymouth, in the historical community, they're cautious about the stories that are out there because, as I mentioned when I was researching this book, we want to be able to tie the stories to a real incident, a real person. We just don't want it to be folklore or urban myth because that mixes up history too much for people. So with that said, another place that people should, when they're visiting Plymouth, that they should check out is the Spire Center for the Performing Arts. There's a show almost every night, whether it's musical show, different acts that perform there, or whether it's a play or a dance show. There's something there for everyone. It's a great place to be on an evening in Plymouth, but that is a very haunted building.
And which building is that in?
It's called the Spire Center, and it's on the corner of Brewster Street and Court Street. It is a former Methodist church, and it was purchased by the town to serve as a performing arts center. The Methodists were, they're known for singing and music, and they built this with the most wonderful acoustics. So it's a treasured building, beautiful to look at, great place to see a show, but indeed very haunted. And the story of the hauntings of the Spire Center are in this book, first-hand accounts from people who work there.
Did you cover Station 1 in the book?
I did cover Station 1. Station 1 is now the San Diego's Mexican Eatery. Great place to go to eat, have a margarita. I interviewed one of the bartenders, and she told me stories that would raise the hair up on the back of your neck. A dog spotted in the basement, just strange happenings. People would be terrified to go downstairs in the basement, yet they have to because they have to work the taps down in the basement. But just strange occurrences in Station 1.
It's funny because I remember when it still was a fire station, I think, when I was a kid, but they turned it into the Station 1 restaurant before it was San Diego's. And I remember reading something about this, grand opening and everything, and there was just a little throwaway line in the story about how they're not even paying attention to rumors that it's haunted. I was like, what the what? Like, this is something that people are putting in newspapers? But you can't help it in Plymouth.
You can't help it in Plymouth, and in particular with those buildings. So those buildings on Court Street, Main Street, North Street, they're all connected underground.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Now, you can look through in some of the basements, and I mentioned Mercy Otis Warren's house. which is included in this book, The Collection of Ghost Stories, with James Warren being the vision that someone saw in the house. But they're connected because of pipes that run through, and so you can look in some of the basements and see other buildings' basements. So energies moving through buildings and basements, I think that really happens in those buildings.
And let's not forget either that, the water is right there. So that's going to help power up a lot of this stuff. And even though you've got the ocean right there, in that area, people don't realize this. There's a lot of running brooks and little rivers and creeks and stuff. That's all kind of flowing through there. I mean, everything that's downtown, the water is flowing underneath there, heading down into Brewster Gardens. There's definitely an amping up of the energies there.
That's correct, yes. And it's reported, and I interviewed someone for the book, and this story is in the book, about shadow people walking up and down North Street, that they're just going about their business. It's as if it's a residual haunting, people doing their regular day-to-day activities, walking up and down North Street, that they have been seen as shadow people.
Is there, we might have covered it, but do you have a favorite ghost story of Plymouth?
That's a good question. I think one of my favorite ghost stories is of the Captain Thompson Phillips house. That house is the only house in Massachusetts that has been given the moniker as officially haunted. It's also one of Plymouth's earliest hauntings as well, but there was a major court case that happened where the owner of the building, he was renting it out to tenants, where he sued his tenants for defamation. And the court came back and said, you can't say that a house is not haunted if your tenants fled and left you high and dry because they were afraid of the noises and the spirits and the experiences in the house. Then they're not slandering you. They were truly afraid, and that house is haunted. So I described the entire experience and the witnesses that would see a pale bluish light in the window, and the different things that would happen, the rapping of canes on the walls and groaning noises. It's all described in the book.
And is there a museum in that building?
I think you're referring to the Taylor Trask Museum.
Yes.
This house is on Middle Street, and it is currently a 5-unit apartment building.
But the Trask Museum has a haunting in it as well.
It does indeed, yes. It's the haunted preambulator or buggy.
Yeah. I've never understood what a pram is. I'm like,
a pram.
It's a buggy. That's what it is.
It's a buggy. It's a baby buggy that moves on its own. Yes.
You got to love some of these stories because it's, it could be the least little thing, but it ties into a bigger overall picture. And that's the thing about, we look at a lot of town, not to plug myself here, but I'm wearing the shirt right now. I worked on a show called Haunted Towns, and we look at places where we say, where does all the activity that's happening in all these hauntings seem to have a center connection? And Plymouth is one of those places where it doesn't have to be all relating to the Pilgrims. It doesn't have to be all but there's some sort of center power that is powering up all of these hauntings. Mm-hmm. And that's why I say, getting back into that, chicken or the egg thing, there's something there. There's something there that is keeping these stories alive, keeping these hauntings active, keeping people experiencing these, because I do think that you have to experience a haunting for it to actually be a true thing that happens. And it's making sure that, these stories will never go away.
Right. Right. And I think that there's an energy about Plymouth that I've never experienced anywhere else. There are times when it's a very negative energy, that there's something negatively pervasive. Then there's a time that it's a very excitable energy. There's so much to do and so much going on in Plymouth. It's a place where there's lots of entertainment venues. It's a place where people want to come to visit. Millions of people from around the world come every year to visit Plymouth.
There was just, 200,000 people at the parade?
At the parade. Of really, one
That's
of the
like
best.
Macy's parade numbers.
It's it's a little bit less than Macy parade numbers, but I can tell you this is something that you should see if you haven't been to the Plymouth Thanksgiving parade. It's the weekend before Thanksgiving, and it is the chronological history of Plymouth represented in that parade, and it's such a good time, great for families.
One of my favorite spots, in just a few minutes that we have left, I just want to ask you, one of my favorite places to go in Plymouth and just spend time, I mentioned how I just love to go to Burial Hill, but another place that I'd love to go to is the Jenny Gristmill area.
Yes.
Is any ghost stories that have come out of there?
No, I don't have any ghost stories about the Jenny Gristmill area, but do go to the Jenny Gristmill and Lucioso's pub, particularly on a sunny day, because you can sit outside and you can sit by the wheel as it's turning, the water wheel, and just have that soothing sound of that wheel in the water. It's a really great experience.
I have not been since they've become that location. I went when it was run of the mill, and they had the best burgers that I'd ever had anywhere. But I love to just pack a picnic. When my son was little, we'd pack a picnic and we'd go there, and people don't really discover the fact that you can walk over to the other little island and spend time there. But that's why I'm glad. I never found any ghost stories there either, so I'm glad you didn't either, because it's a nice, peaceful place to go and get away from the ghosts that are everywhere else.
Yes.
In Plymouth.
Yes. Very haunted. Plymouth is very haunted. North, south, east, west. Indeed.
And that's we really only covered kind of the downtown area. I mean, Plymouth is so sprawling, and I know that South Plymouth has a lot, because I live close to South Plymouth. There's a lot of roads where you want to make sure that you have your high beams on and somebody in the passenger seat with you while you're going down the road, because it's just that freaky. So much more that we can cover, and we'll definitely have you back again to talk more. But tomorrow, people can come out and see you in person. They can meet you. They can pick up the book. They can share their own stories with you. Let everybody know where you're going to be tomorrow.
I'll be at the Seaport Inn tomorrow at the Beautiful Collective's Holiday Fair. It runs from 11 to 4. I will be signing and selling books, and I'd be happy to personalize a book to anyone. Great for holiday presents for people, and great as a keepsake of your own.
And we have a lot of listeners in this area who are, not just interested in the idea of the paranormal. Even to the show, it's not just about the ghosts. People love history, and they love something like this where, and I know just by talking with you and hearing your background, that the history was just as important to you as it was telling the ghost story. It was the same for me with Ghosts of the South Coast. I said, the history is so good, it's overshadowing the ghosts, which is fine, because that's just the way that it ended up working out. And that's what's missing, is being able to tell the true story of the history without the whitewashing and without the biases that we find in history books, and to be able to kind of share the story and to have the ghosts kind of be the humanity that connects it all together.
Right. As I mentioned earlier in the show, these are human stories. They're experienced by real people who truly believe that they were affected by something, a spectral spirit, an apparition, a sound, a feeling, a noise, a smell. So really human stories, and about humans. And even one of the stories, when I write in my chapter, Houses of the Downtown, I worked with a psychic, and we determined that one very haunted house could indeed be haunted by an animal spirit.
Oh. Do you name the psychic in the book?
I do.
Is it anybody I know?
It's Patrice Delory Hatcher. She also served as my photographer. So the book has vintage postcards representing Plymouth's history and some of the sites and stories in the book, as well as historically important and significant photographs.
And how can people follow along with you online, and how can they get the book online?
Sure. Well, I have a Facebook page. I urge you to like and follow. It's called Ghosts of Plymouth, Massachusetts, Author and Book Events. So go to Facebook and follow me there. The book is also available online at Arcadia Publishing, Amazon, Nook, Google Play, iBooks, Kobo, and it's in bookstores locally in Plymouth at the Yankee Book and Art Gallery on North Street in Plymouth, and at the Barnes & Noble in Hyannis, at Westwind Bookstore in Duxbury, and at many of the gift shops around Plymouth as well.
And I'm going to bet that the Sea Witch has it in Fairhaven here, and probably Barnes & Noble in Dartmouth. But the easiest way to get it is just to come and see you tomorrow. And
exactly. Come see me tomorrow.
Get it right from the author, get it signed, share your stories, hear some stories. And I got to put on my acquisitions editor hat now for a minute, because I'm sure they're already contacting you with the success of this book. Are you looking toward another area that you want to tell some more ghost stories from?
There may indeed be another book. Right. I'm not at liberty to say, but keep watch, because I will announce in a month or so.
I'll tell you off the air about the one that I pitched to the History Press a couple years ago, and they still are interested in it, but I don't know. I'm having a hard time getting a lot of the stories, but I'll tell you that off the air. Well, we thank Darcy Lee for coming in and joining us, braving this storm, although it looks like it's subsided pretty well. Thank you for coming in, and we promise that if we call you again, we will make sure that Mother Nature makes it just as spooky when you come back and join us the next time.
Terrific.
Tomorrow you should have a nice day, though. So everybody can come on down to the Seaport Inn and meet Darcy, get the book. It makes a great Christmas gift, and it doesn't matter if you're into the paranormal. It doesn't matter if you're into history. There's a part of it for everybody. So absolutely 100%. I can't think of anybody that wouldn't appreciate getting a book. And who doesn't love getting a real actual book on Christmas? Opening it up and thumbing through the pages and all that. And then just curling up on the couch with the fireplace going and starting the book. Well, we're going to be back next week. I don't know who our guest is yet, because we're booking the show now, so that means it'll be on the fly, as we always do. But we'll be back next Saturday night with another edition of the show. You can always follow our adventures on YouTube. You can find the video of this show and every other show that we've done. And you can find the podcast everywhere the podcasts are found. Reach out to us, SpookyCrew at SpookySouthCoast.com. We want to know who you are, where you're listening from, how you listen, what you think of the show, how you think we can make it better, which one of us you think is the best looking person. That's cool too. If you want to put that down, we're going to lose that. That's going to go to Stephanie. It's not even worth running a poll. But anything that you want to reach out with us to, SpookyCrew at SpookySouthCoast.com. That's the way. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at SpookySC. Follow us on Instagram. We're everywhere. Wherever you are, you'll find Spooky South Coast. So join up with us in those different ways. And as I mentioned, we'll be back next week. We'll have more paranormal topics to discuss with you. I think Ashley will probably be back next week with the Week in Weird. She was a little under the weather this week, so we gave her the week off. But we'll have some more weird stories for you coming up next week. And, of course, whatever you want to bring to the table, let us know all week long. This is your show. We're just the monkeys that come in and press the buttons. That's the way that we look at it. So until next week, we want you all to stay spooktacular.